Hello and thank you for joining me. This is Taliesin McKnight, and in today's lesson I will talk about evocation and invocation. I will discuss the difference between these and also get into the theory and practice behind these as well. So, evocation is to call forth some type of a spirit or entity and to have an interaction with that entity. That is evocation. Invocation is to take this up a notch and to call some type of an entity or force into you. So in the case of invocation, you're calling forth or establishing contact with some type of a god or goddess or some type of a force, some type of an entity. You're establishing contact and pulling that into you so that you're able to partake of some of the essence of the god or goddess, or you're able to take on some of the qualities or characteristics of whatever force you have called. So basically, evocation is to call forth, it is to establish contact and to interact. Invocation is to go at a deeper level and to pull some type of a force into you so that you can partake and part some of its qualities and aspects. So this really goes back to the very origin of religion. It goes back to the very origin of magic itself. It goes back to a period in time in which our ancestors would look out at nature and perceive a vast array of gods or of spirits and would want to interact or establish communication with these various forces. Perhaps they wanted to have bountiful crops and so would call forth or establish contact with the various spirits of fertility. Maybe they needed protection or something of that sort during childbirth, or maybe in a more destructive aspect they wanted to curse their enemy. So whatever the case may be, ever since the very beginnings of mankind's awakening to the existence of a spiritual realm, there has been an interacting with spirits or various forces. And so, like I said, this goes back to the very beginnings of religion. It goes back to the very beginnings of magic, in which one would become aware or conscious of various entities or forces of the spiritual realm and would want to interact, with those forces. Perhaps to gain knowledge, or perhaps to avert disaster, or to gain something in some way. Invocation, again to call within, is also a very ancient practice. In this case, you have in ancient times an identification with a particular deity. You may put on a mask and wish to take on various aspects or qualities. So invocation, again, is at a much deeper level. This is to bring this force into you so that you can partake of its essence, in a sense. So really, the dividing line between invocation and evocation is the difference between these is whether or not you're calling this just calling it, but there's still a separation between you two, or if there's a self-identification, if you're actually pulling that force into you. It should be common sense that you may not want to unite with, you may not want to have a union at the deepest, intimate, most aspect of your being with just any old thing you may interact with. Just like in the material, just like in the physical world, in the more mundane affairs, you may interact with any number of people for business or for education purposes, or maybe you have to interact with your neighbors, but you may not want to get too intimate with some people. So, you know, just like you may not want to become intimate with every person you meet. In the same way, there's this distinction between invocation and evocation. And sometimes there's a fine line between the two. Sometimes when you evoke something over long periods of time, you can begin to take on certain qualities of what you're calling forth. It sort of goes into the idea of sympathy and kind of, if you hang out with a certain company, when you hang out with a group of people enough, you start to take on their mannerisms, or if you hang out with a group of people, eventually there begins to be some type of an influence. So if that begins to happen, it all depends on you. If you want to draw a distinct line and say, no, we're not going to cross this boundary, or if you may be interested, maybe you don't mind taking on some of those characteristics. So it all depends on you. So evocation is the working with some type of an entity, and invocation is to pull that into you, to take on some of the qualities or characteristics of that force. Now, there is some difference of opinion today as to whether these entities are objectively real, or if we're just dealing with aspects of our own unconscious, whether we're just calling forth different aspects of our psyche. So this is where psychology begins to enter into magic. So obviously the more ancient view is that no, these are external entities that we're working with. This was at least the more predominant perspective in ancient times, that you're dealing with actual psychic forces on other dimensions and things like that, or at a subtler realm of the physical plane, that you're actually interacting with these various forces. It's become more popular today to look at this in a more psychological perspective, that when you call forth various spirits, that what you're really interacting with is a part of your own mind, your own psyche. And from this perspective, even if what you see is hallucination in a sense, you're still working with your own unconscious. So whether objectively real or whether it's just part of your own subjective reality, really from that perspective, it really doesn't matter so much. And again, there is some debate here. There are many people that take a more hardline stance that no, these are objectively real entities. You're interacting with these actual forces. You know, you can't just play with them, that these are actual forces out there. And then there are some that see it as a little bit of both, that it's not mutually exclusive, that the inner life of man is a reflection of the external, of the outer life, that the microcosm is a reflection of the macrocosm, so that at the same time, they may exist without oneself, and yet there is a certain part of oneself beneath the surface that also shares in certain qualities. Again, if you're hanging out with a group of people and you also have certain aspects of your own personality, maybe even beneath the surface, that has a certain rapport. So again, that is up for you to decide as an independent thinker and as someone that perhaps works with these systems with an open mind. I would highly advise people to be open. Maybe it's not a good idea to make up your mind before you experience, because then you already have your mind made up, and then you experience something, you may interpret it just in those lines. So I think it's a good idea to be aware of these different perspectives and frameworks, while also being open to other possibilities. In the case of invocation, there is this same perspective. Like I said, invocation is where you call forth, it's when you pull this spiritual force into your own being, so that for a while you can partake of some of the qualities or attributes of a certain god or goddess or a certain spiritual force, that you yourself begin to take on various qualities. Again, there is this difference of opinion. Some would take the stance that these are parts of your own psyche that you're bringing to the surface, and some would say that you're dealing with external forces on the spiritual plane, and then some would take a middle ground to where it's a little bit of both. So from the psychological perspective, you're really getting into pulling up aspects of your own unconscious. I personally try to be open to whatever, because I try not to put my own bias into things as much. I try to let people come up with their own conclusions. So from my perspective, I bring up point A and point B, and it's up for you to decide for yourself how you perceive these. But in the case of invocation, from a more psychological standpoint, this kind of goes in with the concepts of Carl Gustav Jung, the creator of analytical psychology, that the goal is to make the unconscious conscious, that even the most timid person has an inner warrior, an inner courageous aspect of their personality that is below the surface, that needs to be incorporated into the conscious ego so that you can become a more expanded and a more complete personality. Even the most dry and serious person has an inner trickster that is beneath the surface, just dying to come out. That aspect of our own repressed nature, that if you can incorporate different qualities of yourself from beneath the surface, that then you get an expanded quality. And this is how ceremonial invocation can itself become a type of inner alchemy, in that sense of bringing forth different aspects of your own unconscious to expand the personality, to get into contact and to broaden your own ego personality, to understand the different, to get into contact with all elements of one's being. That initiation is really a journeying inward, to get into contact with those deeper aspects of ourselves. So that is one way of looking at it. And then again, there is the view that these are external forces. And there is also the perspective that, much like one would charge a talisman, and also in the sense that initiation is imbuing the personality and also one's energy filled with a certain force. That invocation is that same thing, that in a sense you are a cup, a vessel to be filled with whatever force that is being invoked. So sometimes, usually in the case of ceremonial magic, invocation is just taking on certain qualities. So for example, maybe you're calling upon Hermes to get into contact with the inner trickster aspect of yourself, although there are many other qualities and attributes of Hermes, or the more daring, courageous aspect of Mars. Sometimes invocation could be a literal taking over of another force, such as in the case in ritual possession. You see this, for example, in some of the African-derived religions, such as Voodoo or Lukumi. You see this type of a thing in spiritualism. You see this type of a thing where whatever you're establishing contact with will come through you and sort of take over for a time. As I said, this is not what's normally meant. Usually in ceremonial magic, you want to remain in control. But that being said, there are cases where this is being taken over by that force for a time, to act as a true vessel for whatever you're calling into you. And another example, a very common example of ritual invocation is found in Wicca. Again, Wicca is a topic that I plan to go into in much more detail because the neo-pagan revival is an important aspect of modern occultism and magic, right along with Thelema, chaos magic, things like that. But in the context of Wicca, you have the drawing down of the moon. Drawing down the moon and the charge of the goddess, in which the high priestess acts as a type of vessel for the indwelling of the goddess. During a Wiccan ceremony, there is the drawing down of the moon and there is the charge of the goddess, in which the high priestess, basically the goddess, she is a vessel for the goddess. And there may be inspiration that may come to her. There may be words of wisdom that are believed to derive from the goddess that come through the high priestess. So this is another example of ritual invocation. Again, where one begins to take on various qualities and attributes of a god or goddess, or it could be an archangel, or it could be just some type of a spiritual force. So, really the difference between evocation and invocation is whether or not there is a barrier between it dwelling within you or not. Evocation is where you both remain somewhat external beings, distinct, whereas invocation is an actual ritual identification with the deity or whatever force, so that there is an indwelling within you of that force. So you call forth outside of you in evocation, you call into you in invocation. And again, you should be very careful what you call into you. Just like, you should be selective of who you have sex with. You have to interact with all kinds of people in daily life. You have to interact with your neighbors, you have to interact with your coworkers. Basically, you have to interact with people. You have to interact with a gas station attendant when you pump gas for your car. You have to be able to interact with different people, but maybe you don't want to have intimate sexual union with just everyone you meet. In the same way, just because you're interacting with an entity does not mean that you want that entity to actually indwell within you. So how is this accomplished? How exactly are you supposed to establish communication with some type of an entity or force? Again, whether or not you interpret this as sort of a practical psychology, whether you think of this as getting in contact with different elements of your personality beneath the surface, or whether or not you take this as the more literal, that you're actually working with external entities. Again, I think it's important for people to be open to either or, to be open and just experience. Don't be tied up too much in these frameworks, and maybe a mix of both. It all depends on your perspective, whatever the case may be. Whether this is internal or external, or whether they are both reflections of one another, how do you accomplish this? How does one accomplish evocation and invocation? The key to understand here is the principle of correspondence. This is the master key that unlocks the door. It unlocks the door to communication with other worlds, many people believe. Many people are of the opinion that there's a master key to unlocking the door to interacting with these forces. That key is the principle of correspondence. Correspondence is the idea that there are certain associated colors, associated perhaps drum rhythms, certain timing, certain crystals and stones or herbs, that there are certain objects that are intimately connected with a certain force that you would want to invoke or evoke. Now, once again, this concept goes back to the very ancient roots of religion and magic. This is not a concept created 100 years ago or so. This idea that to establish contact with a supernatural force, you need to have some type of objects that you can manipulate that are intimately connected with that force. This is a very ancient concept that, as I said, goes back to the very beginnings of religion and magic. That these ideas are very old. They go back many centuries, many thousands of years. That let's say that a certain spirit is associated with the oak tree, and that spirit really likes the ram. The ram is associated with this spirit and the oak tree, and there is a rattle, a certain rattle that's associated with the spirit. So, ancient man, with the very beginnings of religion, it would be just understood that you would go to an oak tree, and you may make an offering of the ram and shake the rattle. So, and it may have certain foods or whatever that would be offered. So you see this in some of the earliest remnants of religion. You see this in some of the most ancient and primitive rites. That there is this idea that if you can just get in contact with the spiritual force, you have certain objects that are manipulated to contact it. So this is a very old idea. So we see this, we see a particular way of looking at this. We can see from Renaissance magic and ceremonial magic. We see it from the Middle Ages back to late antiquity and on before that. So as an example, Heinrich Cornelius Agrippa wrote the 3 books of occult philosophy. Heinrich Cornelius Agrippa wrote in the 16th century the 3 books of occult philosophy. These were passed around in manuscript form before finally being published in full in 1533. The 3 books of occult philosophy was probably the most influential text on ceremonial magic, whose influence would be felt for centuries, all the way to our modern times. This text, the 3 books of occult philosophy, outlines how it outlines 3 worlds or 3 realms and a certain sympathy, a divine outpouring. At the center of this schema is what Agrippa called the elemental world. The elemental world of Cornelius Agrippa, again, the 3 books of occult philosophy, each book is assigned to the elemental, celestial, and spiritual realms. So again, this is a 16th century text. You can look it up. This book is published. And so the 3 books of occult philosophy divides up the world into the elemental world, where you have various stones, herbs, animals, metals, various crystals that are believed to have a certain sympathy with various stars, clusters of stars and constellations and planets. So that Agrippa conceived a type of astrological magic in which, like I said, various planets and stars would have a connection, different different spiritual forces perceived to be in the astrological realm had their forces an association, a sympathy with certain stones, herbs, animals, and things like that. So by working with various vegetables and minerals that were associated with Mars or Venus, you could interact with that power. And beyond the celestial realm into the spiritual realm, Agrippa believed that behind the planet or star, you were really interacting with the various angels or spirits or stellar demons behind the celestial body. So where did Cornelius Agrippa get these ideas? Again, he wrote the 3 books of occult philosophy in 1533. Well, that was when it was published. It went around in manuscript form before. That was when it was published in full. But this is a 16th century text. Where did Cornelius Agrippa get this knowledge? Most of what you find in the 3 books of occult philosophy can also be found in a medieval text called the Picatrix. The Picatrix is an Arabic text on magic, which there is some debate on the origin or when this was written. Many scholars believe that the Picatrix grimoire was written sometime around the 12th or 11th century. And of course, the Picatrix takes this idea that various stones and metals and things of that nature various vegetable matter could be associated with various astrological bodies, and through that to various spiritual forces. And of course, the Picatrix derived its knowledge from it's an interpretation of what you see in late antiquity in the writings of such figures as Proclus or Iamblichus from around 2,000 years ago. And of course, they got their knowledge, a lot of the ideas that they were passing around were, and you see these ideas in the Greek magical papyri and things like this. This knowledge was derived from Egypt, Greece, Babylon, from the ancient world. So these ideas are very ancient. This idea that through the use of different stones, different herbs, things like this, different crystals and incense and certain associated colors, sometimes numbers or symbols. The sigil is an example where the sigil is seen as a signature that serves as a magical link with a spirit. This concept is very ancient and very old. This idea that this is the principle of correspondence. So another way of looking at this, so basically, if you want to establish contact with Mercury or Hermes, you would gather the various stones and colors and various associations that are connected to the planet Mercury. Or let's say you wanted to establish contact with some type of a spirit who is associated with the color red, with horns, with, I don't know, nettle, or a certain day of the week. Gathering together these correspondences is believed to serve as a type of personal telephone number to contact that spirit. So again, you gather the particular incenses and colors and various things that are associated with that force that you're trying to invoke or evoke. And also on a more psychological level, you look at these various things also as a symbol system, a type of magical alphabet or symbol system, so that it's very important in magic to focus upon one goal, one thing, with one pointed concentration. In a magical ritual, you want to have one pointed concentration upon the one goal. So probably the most important element of a magical ritual is to focus the mind upon one thing. So that in a ritual, you don't want your mind drifting off to, you know, drama at work, or something that you said to your neighbor the other day at a barbecue. You don't want your mind drifting off to, you know, worrying about bills or whatever. You want to have one pointed focus upon one thing, the goal, which in this case would be establishing contact with whatever entity. You want to focus your mind. An example of this could be seen in light. Light itself is a powerful force, but what is the nature, what does light do? Generally, it diffuses. Now, if you can gather the rays of light into one point, one beam, it becomes a laser and it can burn through things. So instead of scattering your energies all over the place, to bring your energies together to one point. And this is why magic is itself a type of meditation, because you're focusing your mind upon one goal. Now, we live in a physical world with physical objects. So it really helps to have a lot of these correspondences, so that wherever you look during ritual, you may see the color red. You may see symbols of whatever spirit or force. So that wherever you look in your ritual area reminds you of the one goal. through incenses, your sense of smell. Your sense of smell through the incense. The incense associated with a particular deity or spirit. The incense, the sense of smell, again, brings to mind what you're trying to do. It helps you to focus your mind through the sense of sight, through the colors, the symbols, the various objects, or remind you of your one purpose. The sense of smell through incense, hearing through the incantations or through whatever you're chanting over and over, or you may have a drum rhythm associated with a particular spirit, or some type of chant or music which you can pop into a CD player, whatever. The sense of hearing, through the sense of touch, interacting with the different, manipulating the different objects in the ritual. So in this way, you really engage your senses, which help you to focus upon the goal with one pointed concentration. And from a more psychological perspective, you could say that you have a magical alphabet or a symbol system that reaches deep into the subconscious mind, so that you're accessing the subconscious through the use of symbol. So that if the color red, the number 5, the metal of iron, blood, or the color of blood, certain incenses and stones on a Tuesday, the hour of Mars, if all these things bring to mind that one concept, and again, this is a symbol system that you're manipulating to access the unconscious mind. And the other thing to understand is internal correspondence. There's really no point in having the proper incense and colors and timing and the design of the ritual area and all of these things if internally you have an antipathy, if internally your own thought process and mind and emotions are contrary to the ritual, the chances are a lot less that you'll have success and establish contact. So it's very important to have an internal sympathy. You need to learn to direct your own internal forces, that is your mind and emotions. Now, in the Chariot card, in the Chariot tarot card, it shows a charioteer directing 2 horses. Now, this is directing the 2 horses. This means a lot of things, different things at different levels. In this context, the 2 horses are your mind, your thought, and your emotions. You don't, if you want to go this direction, if this direction is where you want to go, you don't want your horses pulling you off this way or that way. You don't want to scatter your energies. You want to go in one direction. So, in this context, on the Chariot card, the white horse and black horse represent your own thoughts and emotions. You want your thought to be focused on the one goal. You want your emotions to be in harmony with whatever you're doing. And also you need to inflame yourself in prayer. You need to become ecstatic. And this kind of goes into in chaos magic. In chaos magic, this excitatory, ecstatic state could be seen as a type of gnosis, in the sense that you have these altered states of consciousness through following the beat of the drum, through focusing your mind, your energies, your emotions. You get worked up into type of an ecstatic state. And this is particularly important in the case of invocation. But really, you need your internal forces to be in harmony with what you're doing. Really, the ritual area is a reflection of your inner life. The ritual area should be a reflection of your inner life you have within and without. So, for example, if you're trying to call upon Venus, whether it's invocation or just evocation, if you're calling upon Venus, or if you're calling upon sort of a seductive, sexy type of spirit or force, you don't want yourself to be focused on being sexually inadequate or ugly, or you don't want to be focused on being pissed off or angry over, something that happened at work. You want your emotional state to reflect the certain pattern, the electromagnetic pattern of what you want to be in harmony with what you're doing. So if you're calling upon a seductive, sexy, spiritual force, you want to bring forth your own sexual, seductive qualities. You need to focus on beauty and seduction within yourself. If you're calling upon a force like Mars, you don't want to be timid or depressed, or you don't want to be, you want to call upon that inner warrior within yourself, that inner strength, so that when you call on Mars, you're in harmony. When you're calling forth the principle of Mars, you're in harmony with that power. You have a sympathy with it. Again, whether you're calling it within or just calling it to the circle, you want to reflect that force within yourself, bring it to the surface. If you're calling forth, whatever the case may be, you need, just like the ritual area should have the principle of correspondence to associate with that principle, internally your emotions and your thought need to be in harmony with what you're doing. Now, this is very different from the typical perspective of, what you see in a lot of external, how do I put this? This is really going into detail and depth to make sure that your ritual is in harmony with what you're trying to call forth. This is the goal. So basically, the master key to unlocking the door to contact is correspondence. That is, internally being in harmony with what you're calling, not disharmony. You want to vibrate at that frequency in a sense. Second of all, you want your ritual area to have the colors, the stones, the herbs, the symbols. I mean, you don't want to pile up your altar. That's not the goal. Sometimes less is more, right? You want it to be a neat area. But whatever the case may be, your ritual area should be in harmony with what you're trying to call forth or to call within. So now that you understand what this is, you understand a bit about the history, and you understand how you establish contact, here we come to a very, very, very important point. And that is this. You don't want to call something unless you can get rid of it. So, it's great to put a lot of your focus on how you're going to open that door and get into contact with some kind of an entity or something. That's great. But you need to spend at least as much time focusing on how are you going to get rid of it when you're done with your ritual. So even if it's a positive force, even if it is a pleasant positive force, generally there is the idea in ceremonial magic and in a lot of modern magic, there's the idea that even if you're calling on something positive, you don't want to call forth a lot of energy and just leave it kind of lingering around. You want to, the 3 steps are, you call it up, you give it a task, something to do, so it's not just there, it has an action, and then you dismiss whatever you called. So even if what you're calling is a positive force, generally there's the idea in Western occultism that you don't want just a bunch of energy just hanging around. You're going to want to get rid of it once you're done. But as with all things, you know, see what works for you. But I advise you to be careful with what you're doing. Generally, in my opinion, I think it's a good idea that if you call something up, you need to be able to get rid of it as well. Sometimes it's easy to open a door, but to shut that door is not always so simple. So a word to the wise is sufficient. So here we come to, we've talked about basically the way to establish contact is to have the correspondences, to have an internal and external rapport with that frequency or vibration or that energy, whatever you want to call it. And then you're going to want to call out. You may want to verbally call out using the various names. Pretty much anywhere, pretty much all around the world, in Chinese systems of magic and ancient Egyptian forms of magic and Greek and, you know, ceremonial magic of Western Europe in the Middle Ages. Pretty much in most forms of magic around the world, in Hebrew magic, all around the world is this concept that if you know the name of something, that in itself gives you a connection, some type of a power. So you may want to repeat its name over and over. You want to call that spiritual force. In the case of invocation, you may repeat it over and over and kind of sway back and forth as you repeat its name over and over and over again and sort of build up that connection and sort of tune in. It's like an antenna that is tuning into a frequency. Okay. Now, once contact is established, there is some people use scrying to communicate. Now, in the case of invocation, it may just be that you're wanting to be imbued with this energy. Maybe you just want to be imbued with the energy so that you can help develop certain qualities of character. Maybe you want to be imbued with an energy, in the case of invocation, to do some type of a magical working, to work a talismanic system or some type of magical working, not system working. In that case, you're invoking a power into you so that you can then cast a spell or do magic, so that it's not just you doing the magic, it's actually the spiritual force doing the magical work through you. But in the case of evocation, that is something is outside you to an extent, and you're interacting. A lot of people use scrying as a way to interact. So you may have a black mirror. These are very easy to make. A black mirror, you can just buy a picture frame, take the glass out, spray paint it black on one side, and then turn it over so that the shiny part is facing you. Put it back into the picture frame, and you've got a scrying mirror for like $3, y'all. So for like $3-4, you can have a scrying mirror. Buy a picture frame, take the glass out, like you would put a picture, and just take the glass out with a flat black spray paint. Just spray paint one side of the glass black, and then put the glass back in the frame with the shiny part facing you. You've got a scrying mirror. Bam, for like $3-4. Take you about, a very short amount of time. You can mark symbols around it. So you might want to have a scrying mirror. In Enochian magic of John Dee, in Enochian magic, he used the shoe stone, which was a crystal that John Dee supposedly obtained from spirit. You may use a crystal ball or a scrying stone, like John Dee and Enochian magic. You may use a bowl of water, a black bowl with some water in it. So you might use a scrying device to communicate with whatever entity. You might want to make offerings. This all depends on the type of relationship you have and who you're calling. Whatever the case may be, a lot of people use some type of a scrying device. So again, you just need to be careful with what you're doing. The triangle of the art. What about the triangle of the art? The triangle of the art comes to us from Solomonic magic, and the triangle of the art is used really for two reasons. One, you're calling something that's considered hostile, that may want to hurt you. So this is why in some forms of Solomonic magic, because again you're summoning demons and stuff, and you have a triangle, and then you're protected by a magic circle. The triangle's outside the circle, so the triangle of the art is used to contain the spirit. So one reason to use the triangle of the art is obvious, that you're dealing with something hostile. I really do not suggest, I don't suggest you work with something hostile unless you have some experience under your belt and you know what you're doing. So I don't want people to just start calling up hostile forces and unleashing them, because once you open Pandora's box, you may not be able to shut it. Now, another reason for the triangle of the art, maybe you don't see it as hostile. Maybe whatever you're interacting with, you see it as a positive force. Or maybe it's something you want to work with, that you don't see it as so bad after all. Some people still use the triangle of the art because the triangle gives you a place to look. It's a physical object that you can say, okay, the spirit I'm talking to is right here. I'm looking right here at this triangle. So the triangle is also a focal point, and the triangle is also a symbol of manifestation. So on the one hand, even if it's not considered hostile force, the triangle could be used or seen as a focal point, a place to look and focus. Also, the triangle is a symbol of manifestation. So you're trying to manifest a spirit to appearance, and you may burn Dittany of Crete. Dittany of Crete is often used in the triangle of art along with its sigil, so that it can help it to materialize in the material form. Or at least where you can interact and communicate. Or some people put a scrying device in there. This is not always used. For example, in Enochian magic, you don't use a triangle. You just have the scrying stone on top of the holy table. You have the Sigillum de Amet, and on top of the Sigillum de Amet, you have the scrying stone, the shoe stone. Now, quick announcement. I will soon be making instructional videos on Enochian magic, so that is coming up. I noticed that on YouTube there's really no clearly outlined directions or instructions on how to work with the Enochian system, so I plan to remedy this. So in some upcoming videos, I plan to talk about how to work with Enochian magic. So that is coming up. Basically, Enochian magic is spirit communication with angels, and it's also a practical magic as well, so that you give them various tasks to accomplish. But basically it's spirit communication with various angels through a scrying stone. And there are various other ways to do it. And Enochian magic, you have the watchtower tablets. where you work with the different watchtowers. You also have the Enochian magic of scrying on the 30 aethers or airs. And you also have the Heptarchia Mystica and dealing with the various spirits of the different days of the week and the planets. So the triangle of art is sometimes used, but not always. Sometimes you just have a scrying stone or whatever. And again, also it depends on how close you want to be to what you're calling. If you're calling something that you don't want too close to you, you might want to use a protective circle and a triangle. Again, this is not for the beginner. So if you're starting out and you don't have experience, you shouldn't even be considering that. My videos are to be instructional on occultism, but I have to warn people, this is not something to play with. Invocation and evocation is one of the most dangerous forms of magic and something that can backfire. So you have to be careful when dealing with invocation and evocation. So yeah, just be careful with what you're doing. If you don't know what you're doing, I highly advise that you get some type of a personal teacher or someone with experience you can work with, and just tread lightly. So I want to be able to teach these topics. You know, this is a reason why you see very little information on these topics, because a lot of times it's like giving kids matches to play with. You really have to be careful. I want to teach these topics, but I also want people to be careful. This is not something to play with, working with these forces and interacting with them. But basically, whatever you call forth, you're going to want to dismiss or be able to get rid of. Now, there are several ways to do this. First of all, and as a general rule, you have the verbal dismissal. So whenever you're when you're done with the ritual, you give it a license to depart. You clearly and vocally say something along the lines of, thank you for interacting. I bid you depart in peace and be ready to return when I shall call you again. Depart in peace. Basically, you give it, tell whatever you call to leave, to depart. And then, depending on what you're doing, you may want to do a banishing. Now, the Golden Dawn derived lesser banishing ritual, the pentagram, the greater ritual, the pentagram, or supreme ritual as well. The rituals of the pentagram and hexagram are great and ideal in many cases for banishing the microcosm and the macrocosm. So you may want to do a banishing ritual, the pentagram, banishing ritual, the hexagram, to sort of clear the air. If you're working in a Solomonic context and you're working from a Judeo-Christian standpoint, summoning demons, then you may want to call upon the divine in order to make sure that the area is cleared and banished. Or if you're working in a more sympathetic standpoint under that system, you may use the hierarchy to get rid of something, calling upon the king or prince or whatever is higher up as a way to get rid of. That, magicians working with these various entities have discovered a certain chain of command, which you may class them as dukes and earls or princes or kings. Really, these are just terms that human beings have ascribed to what they perceive to be a certain hierarchy, like the military chain of command. Again, you should not be calling anything that you don't know how to get rid of. But in general, some type of a verbal license to depart, some type of an actual banishing or cleansing of the area is key. So, basically, just to recapitulate, evocation is establishing contact with an entity and communicating, basically. That is what evocation is. And invocation is to call into yourself. Again, there is some difference of opinion. Some see these as actually external beings. Some see them as working with your own psyche, pulling up different aspects from your unconscious. And some people see it as a little bit of both. That the internal life of man is a reflection of the external world, and that really there is an interaction, as within, so without. So many more videos are to come. That is the basic difference in the basic occult magical theory behind invocation and evocation. There are differences in opinion. So, you know, some people may have a different perception. But there are many different ways of looking at this. So, I want to remind my viewers that my videos come out every Saturday morning. So there should be new videos out every Saturday morning. On some rare occasions, maybe something might come up, but that is the general schedule. And also, I have a Patreon. So those who would like to support my work, maybe, you know, some people would like to support what I do to keep coming out with fresh content, go to my Patreon account. I've given a link in the description box so that my videos are free for everyone. I always want my videos to be free for everyone. This is free knowledge for all people. So that, you know, for anyone, you should be able to obtain this knowledge. That being said, I do a lot of work to make these videos. I do spend a great deal of time in study and also in practice, because I practice what I talk about. I practice what I learn, and then I come to you. So that if you watch my videos, you should gain an understanding of the different aspects of occultism. So it's not required. My videos are free for everyone, but it does take a lot of work. And, you know, if you would like to support the work that I do, then, you know, go to my Patreon account, and I appreciate those that want to support my work. So, anyways, many more videos are to come. I plan to go into Enochian magic. I plan to talk about, you know, neo-pagan revival and Wicca and that, and I want to talk about Thelema and chaos magic, so that in my videos I plan to cover many different topics. I plan to get more into Hoodoo, so that I plan to not just skim the surface. I want to go in deep, into depth and detail in looking at these different occult structures and how they work, and to bring that knowledge and information to you, the seeker. So thank you for joining me, and I hope that everyone has a wonderful day. I'll see you guys next time.